On today's show, we sit down with Coach Dan Blewett, the author, the podcaster, a speaker, a YouTuber, a former professional pitcher. Coach Dan has had 2 Tommy John surgeries, which we talk about, and other baseball stuff.
Welcome to another episode of the Baseball Awakening Podcast, where we dive into the raw, unfiltered, unsexy side of player development. Get ready for some knowledge bombs with your host, Geoff Rottmayer.
Welcome to the Baseball Awakening Podcast. I'm Geoff Rottmayer, and today we are speaking with Coach Dan Blewett. Dan is a former professional pitcher who has endured the Tommy John surgery twice, which he has overcome and became an all-star after each one. He is very active on YouTube, where he puts out great content, and so check out his YouTube channel, Coach Dan Blewett. He's also a former owner of the Warbird Academy, baseball academy, which he prides himself in teaching young players, young people, the lesson that he learned along the way. He's also written 2 different books, one recent one called Dear Baseball God, which is a great book that I highly recommend. You can find it on Amazon. He also hosts his own podcast, Dear Baseball Guys. A well-rounded guy. Dan, how are you, sir?
Hey, Geoff. Thanks for having me on the show, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, listen, Dan, I originally reached out to you after I read your book called Dear Baseball Gods. A book that I highly recommend. You can find it on Amazon. But you wrote that, and I appreciate the honesty in it. And I want to get into some of that today. But let's just kind of start from the beginning. Let's start with you in high school. Talking about your high school days, what was that like for you as a young ball player? And then we can kind of get into some of the adversities that you went through.
In high school, I think a lot of kids go through a lot of stuff. I think it's probably harder to be a high schooler today than it was back then because of the social media pressures. There's a million ways you can compare yourself to other players now. It doesn't matter how good you are, you can find 100 kids better than you on Instagram or on Twitter or wherever. And I think it's probably really difficult to be a high schooler today. But, back then I was a bright kid. I was really interested in baseball. I was always playing in my backyard. So I brought that with me into high school, and I had a good arm. I was a freshman who probably threw in the low 80s. But I hurt my elbow in my freshman year, or I guess it was my sophomore year. And after that, I just had arm pain the rest of my high school career. So I think I always had this really powerful arm, but it really just didn't work for the rest of my high school career. So if I did throw in the low 80s as a freshman, and I was never on the radar gun to corroborate that, but an umpire one day from a prominent high school conference told me that I was one of the hardest throwing 8th graders he'd seen. From that, that was like my peak almost. And as a senior in high school, I threw 78 to 81. I'd touch an 82 or an 83. And so for me, high school baseball was fun. I was a hitter. I played right field, and I was a very average outfielder at best. But I always just knew in my heart that I was a pitcher, but I just had this really nebulous, weird arm pain. It felt like, if you take your bicep, and between the bicep and the tricep, if you just took a hammer and just wailed on that for about 10 minutes, that's kind of how my arm felt every time I pitched. And so it wasn't like I was getting sharp pain where I couldn't pitch, but my arm was just shaking, and I could barely lift it after I was done after 3 innings. And it really just made my high school pitching difficult. I still got a chance to play in college, and that I started to iron things out when I got there. But for me, high school was a weird time because I was a good player, and I was a contributor on varsity. I was on varsity as a sophomore. Hit a home run on my first at bat, which was maybe one of my only varsity home runs. It was a short porch Apo Taco. But, just for me, I got that partial UCL tear as a sophomore. And back then you didn't really know what that was. And like I said, I just had arm pain the rest of the way. So, I can understand that high schoolers, it's tough for them to plan out the rest of their life when they're playing multiple sports. They're not sure what they want to do. They're not sure what kind of player they are. They're not sure who they'll be at the next level. And I think my only guiding light was that I knew I was a pitcher at heart.
It's a natural tendency for us to not want to talk or tell our coaches whenever our arms hurt because, well, we want to play and we don't want to be that guy that's always hurt and that's always complaining. But there are times where, maybe we wanted to have these conversations, which is tough to do. So what's your take on, did you ever have those type of conversations with your coaches? Since how you had a partial tear in your UCL, did you ever have those conversations, or how do you coach your guys in these situations?
Well, for me as a high schooler, my high school coach, John Swanton, he's now retired. He was a terrific guy, and he would never want to push a guy through pain. I don't think I ever just even brought it up. I don't think it ever occurred to me, to be honest. I don't know why, but
yeah.
Obviously, I came out of the game. It was really early in the season when I heard it, and it was in a varsity game. And so he knew I hurt my elbow. And then for the rest of that season, high school season, if you get hurt, even for being out for 4 to 6 weeks, that's like your whole season.
Right.
So he was aware. And then I think just based on my recollection of the timeline, it probably just resolved itself in the fact that high school season probably ended. I don't think I pitched the rest of that sophomore year. And then next year, it just felt like crap. But I don't think I ever did have a conversation with him about it. I don't know why. I don't know. Just looking back, there was never a time I pulled him aside. I just didn't pitch well. And that was, I'm sure, part of the reason for it. But yeah, I don't know. It didn't occur. But for the rest of my life, I was just a phenomenal actor at, learning what to not do to tip someone off that you're hurting.
Yeah.
And so I get that mentality. So when I work with pitchers and,
right.
And they're constantly trying to pull the wool over my eyes, I'm just looking for body cues and body language and looking for facial expressions. And you try to figure out what pitchers normally do, because lots of us, like for me, when I pitched, I was constantly moving my shoulder up, like almost like I'm doing like a one-arm shrug, because I just didn't like the way my jersey sleeve fell down my arm too far. I kind of wanted it pulled up a little bit. So after every pitch, if you watched me, I'm kind of like fidgeting my shoulder, getting my shoulder sleeve the way I wanted it. That was just like a tick of mine. And a lot of pitchers have that kind of stuff. So you kind of have to figure out like, what does the pitcher normally do and what's out of the ordinary and what's not. But lots of different times I had teammates or coaches say, hey, like, your arm's hurting, isn't it? Your arm's hurting you, isn't it? And I'm like, yeah, how did you know? Like, I could just tell. Because I think at a point when you're trying not to touch your arm, you start to look weird too. So
right.
you're starting to like, you get like a super bad itch and you're just like, people can tell that you're not trying to scratch it. So I don't know. It's a battle because and I'm sure you don't want players as a coach who are soft. You don't want kids who are like, oh, I'm hurting, I can't play. I don't feel well, I can't play. Like,
right.
It's a really fine line of finding the balance between I am going to push through this for my team, and this is something I shouldn't push through, and I should tell coach. And it's a really difficult line to find. And even in pro ball, it becomes known which guys are tough and which guys are not. There's guys that are even phenomenal pitchers who are 5 and dive guys. They'll go pitch their 5 innings and think, I don't know, coach. You're like, my arm, I don't feel great. And you lose respect for those guys because they can't pitch when they're not feeling perfect. And the foundation of a great pitcher is, and this was wisdom that lots of guys have been told, is that, if you break your starts up, say your starter or your outings into 4, one time you feel phenomenal. All your stuff is just great. Your fastball is just popping. Your slider's nasty. You're just going to do great that day. You're going to dominate no matter what happens. And then on the other one of the 4 days, your stuff's just going to suck. Like your slider's muddy. Your fastball comes out like, it's just like a grenade. And your command's not great. Your arm doesn't feel good. Just like nothing's good. And you're just probably going to lose those games, even if you battle. But the really good pitchers, what happens is the next 2 games out of those 4, when you just feel okay. Like maybe your slider's not great one day, but your fastball is. Maybe your arm just doesn't feel very good. Maybe you're just like, I don't know, you're feeling out of it. Maybe your fastball's down a tick or two. Can you still win on those other 2 games? Can you still grit through it and find a way to be good when you're not at your best? And so it's a really tough balance, and that's not exactly analogous, but finding out, okay, am I hurt? Am I not hurt? I don't feel my best. Can I still be good for my team? Can I still dominate when I'm feeling 87% of myself? Some guys can't. Some guys just like, they're 5 and dive. As soon as they're not 100% anymore, they want to get out of the game.
Yeah.
And then there's other people like me who are like, I'm jogging up this game and I'm reasonably sure I might blow my elbow out today. That's not good either.
Yeah.
So, it is hard. And I think as a coach, it just comes down to trust, because there's that culture of, and especially in pro ball, you don't want to be the guy who the front office is always worried about. Like, oh, Blewett's hurting again. He's costing us money. He's on the DL again. He's another workers' comp claim. Or you just get called up somewhere. You just get promoted. You don't want to be like immediately diving onto the DL. Like, well, why did we bring this guy up? They're doing their strategy meetings and thinking of who can help this ball club. Let's pull him up here. And then you get there and like, oh, he's got to go on the shelf. Great. Yeah. Well, strategy meeting wasted. So I think it just comes down to trust, and it comes down to the player too. And there's unfortunately this culture of insecurity that is probably never going to go away.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, the injury concerns, and you start to raise an eye at someone who's constantly complaining of pain.
Yeah.
Whether it's real or not, you're like, dude, are you really hurt? Or are you just like, kind of like, does your arm hurt in the way that my arm hurts?
Yeah.
Because you get 10 guys that all have the same pain. If you could measure, like they all have this exact same pain. Well, 8 of them, say 8 of them still play, 2 of them say they can't play, and 4 of them can play exactly as well as if they're healthy, and 4 of them can't. They play a little bit less well. That's just how human beings are. So it's a really good question posed by you, and I think it just comes down to trust. I think that's all I've got.
Yeah, I get that, man. I dealt with shoulder issues whenever I played, which kind of played a role in my exiting of the game, along with, maybe not being good enough. But, it's super tough. Like you said, you just want to advance your game and help your team win. So you mentioned earlier that you had the partial UCL tear. For the people that are listening that maybe don't know what that means, can you explain what a partial UCL tear is?
Yeah, so if you don't know me, I have ligaments that are made of paper mache, essentially, for all the wonderful genes and qualities my parents bestowed upon me. I've always had elbow problems. So the UCL is the ulnar collateral ligament. That is the one associated with Tommy John surgery. So the UCL just prevents your arm from sort of going back into what's called the valgus position. So it provides stability to your elbow, really just in that one specific way. So if you tear your UCL playing baseball, you can not get it repaired if you want, and you'll pretty much be fine in every other aspect of life. Like you can still bench press and, climb a wall. You could do all these random life things. It's a very specific ligament to kind of just throwing a ball because of the way your arm goes back. So I had a long relationship with elbow pain. I don't know why. And one of the assumptions that I want parents and coaches and players to get away from is thinking that there's this idea of perfect mechanics, that if I have perfect mechanics, I won't get hurt. Well, there's lots of big leaguers that get hurt. There's lots of big leaguers with phenomenal mechanics and lesser mechanics, but they're all pretty good mechanics considering they can throw a ball 90 plus miles per hour. So it's hard to define what good mechanics is. But anyway,
yeah.
I had a partial tear of that ligament as a sophomore in high school, another partial tear as a sophomore in college, a full tear the following year as a junior in college, and then another full tear requiring a second surgery as a third-year pro player. And then I had continual elbow pain most seasons in between, whether it was just like tendonitis, whether it was just like, I don't know, whatever. But once you get operated on, and this is something that's, I think, sometimes often misunderstood for those who go through surgery, and I know I'm probably have some of my clients who've been through surgery that I work with listening to this podcast. your elbow's never the same when you come back. Like when they go in and they drill holes in it and they scrape stuff off your bones with a knife and they stitch it, they cut your muscles in half and stitch them back together, you're just going to have weird pain there at times that you really can't explain, maybe for the next month or year or the rest of your life. You don't really know. But I was at a baseball injuries conference, and they, I talked to one of the guys who, his name's Stan Conti, super bright. Well, bright's the wrong word. He's just like a super smart. Bright to me is like you say about a kid. He's a super, super smart athletic trainer, formerly with the Dodgers. He's one of the best minds in baseball injury rehab. But Stan, I was talking to him. I'm like, hey, so after my second elbow surgery, I got this weird finger cramping injury. I was out for 3 weeks. Like I was in the middle of a start, and suddenly my middle finger just started cramping forward, like making my fist into a claw. I'm like, I can't open my hand to get around the baseball. Like, what's happening? I'm like, do you think that was related? And I asked Stan this. I'm like, do you think that weird finger injury that they never figured out what it was, it just kind of went away? Do you think that was related to my surgery? Because they took out, a small muscle in my forearm to harvest a tendon and stitch in there. And he said, listen, once they go in there and they drill and they cut and they stitch, your arm's just going to have weird things happen to it. He's like, there's going to be pain that no one's going to be able to explain and say, this is what happened. Your body's different now because of the holes and the stitches and all that stuff they drilled and put in there. He's like, your body's just different than it was. So you'll probably be fine at some point, but he's like, there's just going to be weird stuff that happens that you can't account for. And I thought that was really good wisdom that no one had really told me in explicit terms prior to that. Because as a an athlete with any kind of injury, especially one that requires surgery, you kind of feel like, oh, I do my rehab and then one day I'm healthy and then I'm good. But really it's just like your body's not exactly the same. And it's not to say you'll always be in pain, but you just might have random weird bouts of it that don't really have a cause, that a doctor can't really explain why, and that you yourself can't be like, well, I did everything right, and yet my arm hurts today for no reason. Like, what's going on? So I know that's a longer answer than you asked for, but
no.
But yeah, elbow pain is a weird thing. Shoulder pain is a weird thing. And navigating the whole situation when you have pain as a parent or as a player, as a coach, it can be really difficult because it can be one of those things where, and again, I've been going through this with a couple young players that I work with who are injured, where they've expected the rehab to sort of progress in a linear fashion. Like, all right, I'm at month 9. I should be feeling better than I was in month 8. But then in month 10, they feel worse than they did in month 6. And then in month 12, they're like, I'm supposed to be cleared here. Like month 12, I'm watching major league pitchers back in the game, dicing up guys on TV, but I can't throw a ball 180 feet and my arm hurts when I sleep. And it feels good some days and terrible other days. Like, what's going on, Dan? And I'm like, that's just unfortunately a part of the problem, a part of the process that goes largely unseen and untalked about. The physical therapists, they understand it, that there's just a lot of like, kind of just pat your patient on the back and be like, look, it's just might suck for the next month, but we're going to get through it. Just keep your head up, keep doing your rehab. And then one day it just might miraculously change. And that's honestly how a lot of the rehab has been over all my years of doing that.
Nice, man. I appreciate you sharing that. That is a conversation that doesn't happen a lot, and to be honest with you, I wasn't really aware of all that. I know I needed surgery on my shoulder, but I never had it, or any surgery for that matter. So I can't really relate. So with that, let's talk about the emotional toll, going through rehab and having someone in their corner like you who's been through it twice and can relate. The thought process is that I should be feeling great after I have my surgery, do my rehab. That's the thought process. And, maybe that's not happening. And then there's this feeling of maybe wanting to give up.
Yeah. So I had Tommy John surgery twice, 4 years apart. And I also had rehab from the partial tears. Like, they're not a quick fix either. They take, 4 to 6 or 8 weeks off, and then 4 to 6 or 8 weeks to come back, doing a throwing program and all that stuff. But with all the surgical rehab, what really ends up grinding people to a halt and really derailing them mentally and emotionally is just the lack of a reason for what they're feeling.
Yeah.
And I had that too. And I had a freak out in my first surgery, and it's in my book. It was like month 16 or something. And I was that month 16 is like, you've maybe finished a season. Like, you're way past what they typically say is a 12-month recovery. Now, I'm here to go on record that Tommy John surgery and a lot of these surgeries are not just, it's 12 months. It's 12 months for some people. It's 11 months for other people. It's 17 months for others.
Yeah.
It's 24 months for others. It just depends on you and your body. The median is more like 14 months. So I'm at 16 months. I'm in the winter because I had an August surgery. So I went August to August, and then this was December, I think. So 16 months later, I'm just throwing bullpens, and my arm just consistently hurts every time out. I'm way too far along to be having elbow pain. I've been throwing 90 miles per hour again for 8 months now. I hit 890 again. It's the 8.5 month mark. I've been throwing 90 for 8 months. Why does my elbow hurt? It's definitely used to it. If it was going to blow out, it would have blown out by now. And I just had finally had it. And one day I was in this gym at the end of the night, and I was like, I'm just going to keep putting weight on this barbell, and I'm going to keep deadlifting it until my arm just stays on the floor. My arm just pulls out of the socket, and then I'll be done with it. So I just kept deadlifting, and I was just really pissed and blowing off steam. Didn't care what happened. Got to 400 something pounds, and then finally just went home. And the next day or week, my arm stopped hurting. And so you start to wait, what's happened here? And was it that the barbell and the weight pulling my joint maybe freed up some scar tissue or just had some physical effect on it? Maybe, no way of knowing. Or was it just that I just finally gave up and stopped worrying about it on a daily basis and stopped ruminating about it?
Yeah.
Could be that as well. My money's probably on the second one. But after that, I was pretty much fine. And in the second surgery, there was a similar thing where I just, the second one we knew it was going to be harder because they already had so much surgical trauma in there. They were, drilling a second time, putting a, second new ligament in there. They take a tendon and they weave it through these drilled holes they put in your elbow. And so we knew it was going to be harder, and we were planning for it to be a slower pace, longer recovery. And I just knew that I was going to live with a certain amount of pain or whatever. And after a while, it just wears on you. But one day, I was just throwing every day with a small amount of pain from months 9 to 12 or something. And every day, just I have this little bit of pain. It pisses me off, but I just do my throwing, whatever. And you just sort of live with it. And then one day, I remember I was just throwing, and then I just was halfway through my throwing session, and I was like, wait, my elbow doesn't hurt. Did that happen just today? When did that happen? And that's kind of how it is. And I feel when people are chasing something, whether it's, they want to be, this big career goal, they want to be this, successful writer. They want to be this successful, TV personality. They want to be a successful lawyer, a respected, school teacher, whatever it is. There's never a banner that you run through a marathon where I've ran through the banner. I'm officially a great teacher. I'm a great doctor, or I'm a, whatever it is. I'm a great accountant. It's always just you kind of slowly get there. And then one day you kind of look around, you realize you're wait, I feel like I am that thing I always wanted to be. And it's kind of the same way with surgical rehab. It's oh wait, maybe I'm back. There wasn't a party. I didn't get to hit a piñata and the new me fell out of it. But it's just wait, I can kind of do all the stuff I used to do, and I'm not in pain anymore. And I'm am I here? I feel maybe I'm here. And that seems to be how it is in life, because we look at these celebrities on the web and, famous people we look up to and successful people, and you say, wow, I'd love to have what they have. And how did they ever get, that level of success and followers and sold so many copies of their books? And it wasn't overnight for them either. It wasn't they just did a thing and suddenly they have 100,000 new Twitter followers and 100,000 books sold and 2 movie deals. It was still a slow ratcheting up for them too. And then one day they're wait, I have all this stuff going on. This is cool. How did this happen? But then you look back at the the breadcrumbs, and it was, oh yeah, it took me like 8 years to do this.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the same. It's kind of the same thing with rehab, I think.
Yeah. So you had mentioned that you had all the injury despite, all the arm care that you did, weight program, recovery program, mechanics, whatever it is, you guys still get hurt, so having the perfect mechanics or the perfect arm care doesn't really equal to not getting hurt. The body is a very tricky thing. Knowing what you know now, do you think you could have identified certain things that could have helped you maybe keep you healthy?
Well, I think you just at the end of the day have to be introspective and really consider what you're doing and how it might affect you. So anything that you're doing, whether it's this is my strength training routine, this is my throwing routine, these are my pitching mechanics, this is the amount of rest. Your whole life as an athlete that you plan out, it needs to have a sound basis. So usually, obviously, as a young player, you get your strength routine from a strength coach and a rehab from your therapist, and you have all this main guidance that this is what's worked for other players in your situation with your injury. So follow this as a template, and from there you start to iterate and say, okay, well, this might work a little better for me. Let's try some of this. This maybe isn't working well for me. Let's do a little less of this. But you have to know your body, and you have to be a good scientist about it and try to figure out what variables might be at play. And this is where I think a lot of players go wrong with rehab. And I remember I had one a long time ago, a kid who just didn't listen. He was in our facility, and he was playing catch with his dad in his brace, like throwing a ball across the living room, I heard, later through the grapevine. And he was prioritizing his weight training at a time when his elbow hurt. And he was like pushing really heavy dumbbells and incline bench presses. This was with his community college team. And he's coming to me like, hey man, my elbow consistently hurts when I'm throwing. I'm like, well, maybe put the 90-pound dumbbells down, dude. Like, what's your priority here? Is it to get back on the field, or is it to be an animal in the weight room? Because if you ask me and you give me all this stuff that you're doing, here are a couple red flags that stick out that might be causing some extra elbow pain. It might be these 90-pound dumbbells that you're pressing on the incline bench press, which might be right for some guys, but it sounds like something is really aggravating your arm. So of all the different things that you're doing, like you need to be throwing, your throwing routine seems fine. Your running routine seems fine. The amount of rest you're getting seems fine. Most of your workout seems fine. But here's a couple red flag exercises that maybe are putting a little extra stress on your elbow at a time when it's doing a lot. Like when you're throwing again off the mound and throwing hard, your elbow starts to react to more stuff because there's more stress put on it. And he didn't listen. I mean, he maybe it was like an insecurity where he felt like he had to really push hard in the gym, and his elbow just continued to bother him, and he never really got back to what he was. But so it needs to be that mindset of what is your priority. And for me, especially my second surgery, the priority was I need to get back on the field, and nothing is going to prevent me from doing that. And I cut out a lot of upper body exercises that I felt were a little more risky for me. And I said, I'm just going to crush it on my lower half, and I'm going to give my elbow the best chance to succeed. Here's my whole training plan. And I'm going to continue to revisit this and say, how do I feel like this is working? What could I add without getting a major reaction? And what could I subtract that maybe isn't helping me or maybe is hurting me? So it can be a complex process, and a lot of this stuff is better done with a team, like a rehab or a rehab professional and a strength coach. But I was all those people for myself. Like after a while, as an independent league player, you're not in Arizona rehabbing with your major league team. You don't have other people really guiding you through it. So I had to do it all myself. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of obvious questions I ask when I work with new clients, or I'm talking with a player who's got pain. And it seems like they've never asked this question themselves, or no one else has asked it for them. And, like, for example, I had a kid who was doing power cleans with he had consistent elbow pain. He was only like maybe 8 months out of surgery. And I said, well, think about the motion when you're doing a power clean.
Right.
Your elbow is getting thrown back into that position with a heavy barbell in your hand. Now, are power cleans the reason you tore your elbow? No. Could healthy pitchers do power cleans and not have problems? Yeah, sure. But is this potentially a cause of your pain or something that's adding stress where now the entire picture of your workload is too much? Absolutely. This could be an issue. Let's back off of this right now and see if things improve. And we did, and they did improve a little bit. So was that the sole reason his elbow started to get better? No. But it was definitely one variable that was probably adding extra stress. If you consider your elbow like a glass or any body part that you're rehabbing like a glass of water. And if it gets full with stress, it's going to spill over and that's pain. Well, maybe like you can get close to the brim and you're good, but then the power cleans he was doing was causing the glass to overflow, and now he's got pain. So it's about just taking, like I said, being kind of a good scientist and really assessing and having someone in your corner, especially if you're a young kid, like, you're going to learn a lot of this over time. So having someone in your corner who can ask those tougher questions and be like, look, do you feel like what you're doing right now, is this worth the potential risk? What things might be causing you to slow down in your rehab? What might be bothering you? And what things could we potentially add that might help outcomes get better faster? So that was a long answer, but it can be really complex. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. That's the conversation that you have with guys, especially if they want to play. The attention to details matter. But like you said, you got to find a team of people that can help you and can ask these tough questions, because you don't know it all. You don't know what you don't know. One coach isn't going to know it all. So finding different people to reach out to is going to be the key.
Yeah, and it's a lot of like in my book, one thing that was, I wouldn't say the word's fun, but kind of fascinating about sharing my story in its entirety was that I get to kind of view my career in baseball from like a bird's eye view. And so I didn't really realize it over time, but there were like 8 major mentors, like coaches and friends who really made me who I was. And all of them contributed something different. And all of them gave me a different sort of piece of my armor to tackle some of the issues that I face as a player. Some were hard on me, some were easier on me, and they're all just different, and they all gave me something different. And one of the books that I'm reading right now, I always say reading, but I'm an audiobook fanatic.
Yeah.
I'm listening to General Jim Mattis's audiobook called Callsign Chaos, and he was our Secretary of Defense for 2 years before resigning, I guess, earlier this year. And one of the things, number one, he is a very, very smart and accomplished man. You can just tell this from the way his book is written. But the biggest thing he talks about, and this was actually something I was listening to on my commute this morning, he talks about how he got this higher level command position, and it was a new skill set for him. And he didn't exactly know what the demands of the job would be. And he had to like adapt his skill set. And so he said, all right, well, the Army, he was a Marine. The Marines don't settle for failure, whether it was difficult. Well, it doesn't matter what the excuse is. Like, things are going to be difficult. It doesn't matter. So he said, how can I help myself get this skill set faster? So he is just an avid proponent of reading, because he says that other men who've lived all these experiences in their lives write their books, men and women, I should correct myself. They've written their stories down to share with you the experiences and the failures and successes that they had. So as he was talking about getting this new job and needing a new skill set, he said he identified 22 books that he felt like he should read to help prepare him for that job. And undoubtedly, every time I read a book, I feel a similar way, where I picked up a couple of things from someone, just like the way they approached a problem or just something that they said. And I picked up a ton from this book by General Mattis, which has been a really good read. I highly recommend it. But he just continues to fall back on his education, reading, Civil War generals, reading Roman history, Marcus Aurelius, like all this stuff. Like he's super well read. And when you're super well read, he's constantly falling back on things other people did in similar situations, and with advice that they gave others from their failures in those situations. So I think being well-rounded as a player, it's going to come from your mentors in person. People are going to give you those experiences in person. But I also, one of my biggest regrets as a player and a person, and I'm correcting this now, is just not reading as much when I was younger.
Yeah.
I don't think kids read as much anymore. I didn't read voluntarily when I got out of school. But I read a tremendous amount, mostly through audiobooks now. And I just find it's super valuable, just finding a new perspective, because a lot of these things, you just don't know what you don't know until a light bulb goes off. And whether it's, like I'm learning things from General Mattis that are going to apply to my business ventures now and my coaching ability now. He talks a ton about leadership. I mean, the book is about leadership. And you think, wow, what if I had thought of that, his perspective on this issue back when I was rehabbing my elbow? Maybe I would have done this. Maybe I would have done that. And it's just sometimes the light bulb goes off and says, oh, yeah, I should probably sit down with myself and maybe write a list of things that are potentially, bugging me, my elbow, whatever it is. Or maybe I should do it this way because this person did this when his troops were failing. You just never know what thing is going to spark you to change and to see things a different way, and maybe to audit your own life in a way that helps you get better, or helps someone else get better.
Yeah, that's true. Even with, a certain way of saying something, I could say something and a kid just not get it. But the guy right next to me could say the exact same thing and only state it in a different way, and the kid gets it. We got to get the ego out of the way, as coaches, So, when you've been telling a kid something for years, and now they get it because this one guy said this one thing, different things click with different people. And I know it was that way when I was trying to build my business. Actually, you and I had a conversation prior to this recording, and you said some things that clicked with me during our conversations. So I get that, having the right team and the people. And maybe you got to hear it 3 to 4 to 5 different times, different ways to really understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you just never know, when you're ready to hear a person's message either.
True.
And, I'll give you one thing I thought was very profound about my college head coach. And one thing I didn't find valuable was one thing he said, like, he didn't mess with freshmen too much about tinkering with their mechanics or changing them or teaching them too much about certain aspects of the game as freshmen, because he knew they wouldn't listen until they failed. Freshmen come in, especially in Division I baseball, and I played for a small D1. These guys were the studs, the all-stars of their high school teams.
Yeah.
So they think they know how to succeed in baseball, and largely they do, but not yet at the next level. And so it's a really big jump from high school baseball to D1 baseball. And so he could say, hey, you got to pitch down the zone more. You got to pitch inside more. You got to use your changeup more, whatever it is. It's not really going to sink in until they go out and say, oh, yeah, what I did in high school is not working. Like, they just hit 2 tanks off me, and I just got hit like I've never been hit in my life. Now, coach, what was that you were saying? I should pitch in more?
Yeah.
Okay, got it. And then they do it, and they see a difference. They go, okay, this makes sense. Like, now I'm starting to understand what I need to be successful at this level. But a thing that my college coach said that I strongly, especially now, disagree with, which I think is just objectively false. He didn't like us playing he didn't like us playing summer baseball because he felt like we came back and were maybe contentious to his coaching style, that we went off and learned something, was kind of what he said sometimes. And to me, it was like I learned a ton in summer baseball, and I did come back sometimes challenging things that were taught to us.
Right.
Because I said, well, my other coach explains it this way, and it makes sense to me, and you explain it this way, and it doesn't make sense to me. And I feel like he just at times fought the fact that guys would come back, learn from other coaches, and want to use some of the stuff they learned on our team, and he wasn't super amenable to that. So for me, my education as a player and as a person was shaped by so many different people. And you have to be willing as a coach. And I was the head coach of my academy teams and as a pitching instructor. And kids are going to hear different stuff from different people, and it's all going to be helpful in some way. Now, one coach might say something that's just patently false, and that happens a lot, unfortunately.
Right.
But still, they need to learn from other people. And so you can't, as a coach or a parent, be threatened by, your players going off and having a new pitching coach or a new hitting coach or a new head coach, and they're going to learn new stuff and they're going to hear it in a different way. And sometimes that's going to be a huge benefit to them because something clicks, like you said, just because a different person phrases it in a different way at a different period of time in their life. And that's great, because I know that I've beaten concepts to death with kids that they just didn't want to do. They just didn't really believe in it, whatever.
Right.
But then they go off to someone else. It's like, oh, you fixed that thing. Yeah, he explained it this way. I'm like, oh, you mean the thing that I've been telling you for 2 years? And it's not, it's not like to take offense to it as a coach. Like, we just understand that if I'm going to give you 100 pieces of advice, maybe 39 of them stick and you buy into them, and that's fine. And the other 61 might be sound pieces of advice, but you're going to get 12 of those. You're going to take 12 of them from the next coach, and then 13 more from the next coach. And then maybe you do take all 100 pieces of advice, but they end up coming from 9 different people, not just me.
Right.
And I think we also understand that as coaches, that we just sort of max out. We become a talking head at some point, and they just do need to hear it from somebody else.
Yeah, no, I agree. One of the things that you talk about in your book, Dear Baseball Guys, is the emotion of when we were playing a game. So you, as a pitcher, there are times where you just kind of get into a role, start, getting guys out, and then all of a sudden you hit a wall and you're starting to get raked. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because we don't really have these conversations enough on what our thoughts and what our feelings are when we're standing on that mound or when we're standing in the batter box.
Yeah, so I think I'm a good example, and because of just how naturally sort of stoic I am. People, when they would walk into my academy for the first time, kids would be a little intimidated by me. I'd often be asked if I was like a former military. I'm not, but I just kind of have like that, I guess, presence where I'm just very matter of fact. I can be very direct. I like things done a certain way. I have everyone's best interest at heart, but I can be very stern. And at first, I'm very I'm definitely an easygoing, slow to anger, kind of silly person deep down. But on the surface, I'm a little more of a tough outer shell. But I think I'm a good example in the fact that when you watch all these guys and girls out there on the field, whether it's baseball, softball, any other sport, especially when they're in the professional level, you don't see much emotion. You don't see many cracks in the armor. You just see this confident person staring in, firing the next pitch off, no matter what happens, they get the ball back. When they're in youth baseball, softball, you see more of, the hands get thrown up, you see the heads go down, you see the negative emotion. But no matter what happens, I think too often people forget that they are human beings out there on the mound. They're human beings at the plate, in the field, and that never turns off. And whether we talk about it or not, it doesn't turn off. And so I was the same as anyone else. I'd grit through pain. I was tough. I was not going to come out of that game unless I had to be carted off. I was a kind of fierce pitcher, especially in my last 5 years when I really kind of came into my own about who I was. I'd pitch inside. I didn't care if I hit you. I was going to go after people. I was an aggressive, kind of bulldog. That was my reputation. But it doesn't change the fact that when I'm out there, you can get this flood of fear of failure and consequences. You go home and you realize that, God, my ERA is going up. I might get released. And you start to put this snowball of pressure on yourself that everyone feels, but no one really wants to talk about. And it doesn't necessarily all need to be talked about. But sometimes, even when we just need to vent and feel like we have a friend and someone that we can relate to and just kind of get it off our chest, it even feels hard to get it out then. Yeah. And so in my book, I was really candid about it because I didn't want to just glaze over stuff that I think is valuable. And one of the things I'm doing in my post-baseball phase 2 of life is I want to educate parents and athletes and coaches about really what their kids are going through and what pro guys are going to go through when they leave the game, because we just still don't talk about it. And what I mean by that is, I gave a speech at Sabre Seminar in August, and it was about my worst meltdown as a player. And I phrased it as, I'm going to paraphrase the whole speech in about a minute, but this was a story that I denied to myself why it happened. I mean, for me being a very introspective person, I still did not want to come to terms with what actually happened on the mound. I was dealing with a lot of shoulder pain, the shoulder pain that ended my career, and my results were getting worse and worse on the field. But I was still throwing mostly as hard as I was. I was still mostly making good pitches. There wasn't a clear thing wrong, but I was just not pitching well. And so anyway, I'm out there on the mound, and this talk was called the Black Swan. And if you're not familiar with what the term Black Swan is, it's a negotiation term that I learned by this really good book called Never Split the Difference. Highly recommended book by a former FBI agent. I can't think of his name at the moment. But anyway, the Black Swan is a piece of unknown information that, if known, would change everything about a negotiation. So like maybe you're trying to buy a house and you're wondering, like, why is this price like so high or so low or whatever? And then you kind of realize that the father got laid off and they really need to sell right away. That would be like a black swan. They wouldn't want you to know, because if you found out that they were desperate to sell the house, you could really lowball a lot better price. So as you watched me in this game, I went out there, and this is what happened. I went out there, and it was like a Tuesday night. It was like a Tuesday afternoon or night game, just a very pedestrian game. I came into pitch in like the fourth or fifth, with the bases loaded and no one out to bail out a teammate. And I strike out the 3-hitter, and then I strike out the 4-hitter, like punch out, like boom, Dan's in the game. And then I walked the 5-hitter, walked the 6-hitter, so I walked in 2 runs after two dominant strikeouts, and then gave a bases clearing double into the gap. So I not only cashed all my buddies' 3 runs, but then 2 of my own as well. So I come in, and you see this guy, boom, boom, strikes out. He's complete control, and then completely loses control, walking to and clearing the bases. And you say, what just happened? How did this guy do that? Why did that just happen? And as a spectator in the stands, or as someone in my dugout or the opposing team's dugout, you wouldn't have been able to make sense of the situation. You wouldn't have been able to make sense about why I did that.
Yeah.
But the black swan in that situation was that the previous day, or the previous weekend on Saturday, I gave up 3 runs. I came into a situation, a clean inning, gave up 3 singles, and then the reliever after me gave up a grand slam to give up all my runs. It was not his fault. It was my fault. But that, to me, was like the end of my time in that team's uniform. So I was like, this is it. I've been pitching like crap for a while now. This night, 3 singles, and then they all score. That was just like the punctuation mark to a bad season. So I figured I was going to get released the next day. My ERA was like 7. That night sucked. I just been terrible. But I didn't. I didn't get released the next day, and then we went on a week-long road trip. And so this Tuesday game was day 2 of that road trip. And so basically on Sunday and Monday, I was coming to the terms with the fact that I was going to get released, that I was dead with that team, and that I wasn't going to pitch for them anymore. So after that, I was like letting go of all the pressure I put on myself to try to like right the ship. And like, this was at the very end of my career. This was the culmination of my career when I was pitching my best. I was an all-star the previous season. So that season had more riding on it than ever before in my life. All I had to do was keep pitching well like I did in the previous year, and I probably would have gotten a chance with a major league club. And so as I felt all that slipping away, things got worse and worse, because mentally, no, you got to pitch better tomorrow. You got to pitch better.
Yeah.
This is it. This is it. You're 30 years old. This season is your shot. Don't let it slip away. And then again, on that night when that grand slam went out, I was like, it's over. Like, just move on. We'll find a new team. We'll start fresh, and we'll do our best. And so because I was mentally moving on, when I pitched that day on Tuesday, going into a bases loaded, no one out situation, I put no pressure on myself. I'm like, I've been pitching like crap. No one expects anything out of me. I'm expecting to get released when we get home. Whatever happens, happens. Yeah. And so, boom, boom, strikeout. Because I was able to pitch free like my old self. And then as soon as that happened, I realized all of that at once. I was on the mound. I'm like, wait, am I back? is this the old me? I just struck out their best 2 hitters in this bases loaded, no out situation. Maybe if I strike out this next guy, I can have it all back. I'll get my life back. I won't get released. They'll think I'm turning the corner. Maybe I am. And the old Dan is here. Like, here he is. I'm just going to have a string of a couple good weeks, and then my life will be back to normal. And because I immediately thought all of those thoughts on the mound before the next hitter came in, I subconsciously didn't want him to hit the ball.
Yeah.
And when that happens, you have this miraculous ability to miss the strike zone.
Mm-hmm.
It's miraculous, because the strike zone is the thing most in front of you.
Right.
You know, and so I walked him, and then I walked the next guy, and then because I was afraid of anything worse happening, I hung a curveball to a guy that couldn't hit curveballs, and he just banged it into the gap. And so it was just a culmination of all my worst fears, because I was so scared to let everything slip away in that moment.
Yeah.
And that stuff happens.
Yeah.
And even if, as you'd watch that, you wouldn't have seen me have like a physical meltdown. You might have seen me like gritting my teeth, and you might have been, if you could like zoom in on my eyes, you would have seen that they were like on fire with anger at myself. But you wouldn't have seen like a tantrum like a little kid throws. Like, I was exactly mostly the same in that situation as I was in any other situation. And so that was the Black Swan, was my mentality, and all the context, all the things that I stood to lose by not finishing that inning off. To see like 30 years of baseball come down to 1 out, basically.
Yeah.
And so I didn't, even that story, I didn't share with anyone. I didn't put in my book. I did not want to admit that even at my best, I was still a mentally weak human.
Yeah.
Like I'm not a weak person, and I'm not weak because I hope that I explain that.
Right.
I want other people to understand that your kid, even in the major leagues one day, your daughter, even in the College World Series, is still a human who has some weakness.
Yeah.
And it might rear its head sometimes. And you might not understand how they could strike out or let that ball go through their legs in a huge situation. But it's just because they're human. And just like, you can't turn your brain off. The best athletes are better at it, but none of us can completely do it.
Yeah.
And it's what's fascinating about the sport, and it's what's hard about the sport. And I think the more we can find a balance about talking about it, because we don't need to have pity parties.
Right.
Like, we don't need
Sure.
we don't need to be constantly whining and venting and complaining and having therapy sessions to each other about how hard baseball and softball is. Like, that's not what I want either.
Right.
But I want people to understand that there are a lot of kids that I'm sure have read my book or listened to that story on YouTube, like that whole presentation's on YouTube, that have read that and they're like, yeah, I feel that way too sometimes, or that's happened to me in different terms. And if it happened to Dan, and he got as far as he did, then I can be okay. Like, I can get through this. I can find a way.
Right.
And it's just sharing a shared experience. But right now, athletes don't want to give these shared experiences of failure and vulnerability to each other or to the world, because they're afraid of still looking weak or being ostracized because of it or whatever. But, at a certain point, you realize, like, I'm not weak. Like, I'm just not.
Yeah.
And so I'll tell you where I failed, and I'll tell you where I succeeded, and you can sort it out and make something of it if you want. But because I now know that I'm not weak, I'm not afraid to talk about times that I was.
Yeah, it's crazy. As I sit here and I listen to you, it's crazy all the things that are coming back to me. So obviously at the moment I wasn't really aware of what I was thinking. But now that I look back and realize, I can now realize the impact that my thought had on my performance at the time. But at the moment you're not there. You're not really aware of it. I mean, do you agree with that, or were you aware, or is it whether you're post-playing day and reflecting back kind of a thing?
No, not at that moment. No, but I remember feeling the way I felt. Like, I remember having a moment and being introspective and saying, I might be back. Like, I can have my old life back. Let's finish this. Like, we can do this.
Yeah.
But then there's also that other side. It's like, but what if you don't? What if you can't? But what if this guy hit? Like, you start to visualize stuff that you don't want to see. Like, I remember that situation almost photographically.
Yeah.
The least capable hitter of the inning was the 5 hitter.
Yeah.
And I remember his stance. I remember what he looked like. He was the least likely to punch a ball out or do whatever. The 4 hitter that I struck out had like 20 something home runs, and it was like June. He was having a crazy season. I think he hit 40 home runs in the Atlantic League this year. He's still playing, but yet I remember visualizing him spraying a line drive into the gap.
Yeah.
I remember it.
Yeah.
And whether that was a conscious thought, it was just like your brain is constantly working, and you have to fight it to not present like a movie the disaster scenarios in front of you. You have to present the positive scenarios, and you have to see yourself succeeding. At the very least, you have to kind of walk the plank. Because the hardest situations for me were ones like that, where you're afraid of throwing that first pitch, and you have to do it anyway.
Yeah.
And I remember that time, and other times, there was another time specifically in Long Island where I came with the bases loaded. And with a bases loaded situation, the best thing you can possibly do is get a first pitch strike. And you have to, in most situations, throw a first pitch fastball to do that.
Yeah.
I wasn't a guy who had a good enough command of my off speed stuff to throw a first pitch off speed in too many situations. But there, if you go first pitch fastball, the bases loaded, you can get ahead, and then you can do lots of stuff. But if you go first pitch off speed pitch and they take it, and now you're behind, now you've definitely got to go fastball, and now you're 1-0.
Yeah. And
a 1-0 fastball to base load is very, very dangerous. So you kind of take your chances. Again, that's just one possible scenario.
Sure.
But for me, when I knew I was going to, like, all right, first pitch fastball, get ahead, it's scary. You're like, he's probably ready to ambush this, and I know that I'm just going to compete and let it eat mostly down the middle. So let's do it. It's just kind of like you're in the boxing ring and you're both just going to take one punch and punch each other in the face.
Yeah.
It's like scary, but you're like, I'm going to hit him harder, I think. I think if I hit him harder, he'll go down. Even though he's going to hit me in the face too.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it always felt to me. And those moments are fight or flight. And most of the time, like, I won. Like, I just ram it in there and get it by him. He'd foul it off, or he'd take it, or I'd throw it by him. And you sort of learn to block out the fact that he might just pump this ball into the gap.
Yeah.
But at that time, in that field in York, I couldn't get past it. And so it was ball 1. Then it was ball 2. And I was just fighting myself, and I lost that battle. So it's experience, and it takes time, and it takes showing up to those battles with yourself, and sometimes winning to say, okay, I can win that battle. And there were times in my career as a pitcher, I specifically remember one where I was in normal, my rookie season. I pitched 7 innings, and after I finished the 7th, I was at like 110 pitches, maybe 105 pitches. And they've been throwing me out for 120 a lot. But I was pretty sure, like, the way the inning went, that I was like, that was like a good 7th. I finished it, like, I'm done. And I came in, like, kind of mentally preparing to be done, and I was, like, physically out of gas. And they asked me the question, and you know the question, can you give us one more?
Yeah.
How do you feel? The answer is always yes. The answer is never no to that question.
Right.
And that's going back to that line we talked about earlier. When the coach says, can you give us one more? The answer is never no, unless you're hurt. And that's one of those really hard things as a pitcher, because even for me as a coach who wants kids to tell me when they're in pain, I want the answer to be yes.
Right.
But I just don't ask them that. I don't ask them that question, because I know that I want the answer to be yes. I want them to want the answer to be yes. So I don't ask them if they have one more. I just tell them if they are coming out or not. And so, because they're always going to lie,
right,
and they should lie.
Right.
So that's why a coach has to make the decision for the kid. You don't ask the kid to make the decision. But anyway, I'm gassed. I don't believe I can get more outs. Like, I knew at that point I could not get more outs. And he said, can you give me one more? I said, yep. And I said, oh shit. I said, oh crap. Can I? I got to go back out there for the 8th. I'm going to blow this game. I think I'd thrown a good 2-run game at that point. I'm like, I'm going to blow. This is going to become a mess.
Yeah.
And I went out there and I had like a 1, 2, 3 inning. And I was like, wow, that was like that. I was kind of okay. Like, I did it. I got through that. And you have to have battles like that where you're afraid, and you have to rise up and you do your best. And some of the times you're going to be fine, and sometimes you're not. But that was a really big moment for me that sticks out in my rookie season, because I just was mentally and physically done, and I knew it. And I did not believe I could get another out for my team, but I had to. So I went out there and I competed. And that's something I think a lot of kids lack these days, is the ability to compete and be scrappy when they're tired, or when they just don't think they can.
Yeah.
And little moments like that shaped me for later on, when you're really scared and you're really out of gas, and it's a really big situation and the stakes are higher and the hitters are better. And then you're like, you draw on that subconsciously. Like subconsciously, it's like, okay, I've had times where I was more tired than I am today. Let's just keep pitching. Let's get through it. So yeah, baseball's crazy, man.
It is. And the more guys like you, and I got to be honest with you, Dan, you know, you're kind of inspiring me to maybe open up a little bit more and talk a little bit more about what I felt and what I was thinking as I pursued the same dream that we were all going for and coming up short. You know, I mean, as you say, you become more relatable because you can communicate the feeling and the thought that maybe these kids, maybe they're aware of it, maybe they're not. But because it does come down to what you're thinking and what you're feeling when you're standing on that hill and you're standing in the batter box.
Yeah, and, you know, I actually have been to a bunch of major league and minor league games recently, because I go and I get some footage, and I use it for YouTube and other stuff. But I remember when I was a kid, I'd go to these games. I'm sure every kid feels this way. The ballparks are so big to a kid, and the players are so big to a kid. Even when you're in high school, even when you're in college, the players are so much bigger than you.
Right.
But today, I go to games, and especially major league games, and they are the same as I was. They're not physically different than I was. Most of the guys on the field do similar stuff. That, like, I threw as hard as some of those guys on the field. My curveball was better than some of those guys on the field. Now, they were better than me, just objectively. Like, they made it to major leagues. They could do stuff I couldn't.
Right.
But when I go to games like that now, as I see those players walk off and stream into the dugout, I look at them as a peer, as that guy likes music, that guy has insecurities, that guy might have a girlfriend that he fights with sometimes. It's nice to do something. Like, it's just like they have a normal life just like I did. Those guys are the same person that I am.
Yeah.
They're not different than me. Whereas when you're a kid, you look up to someone like Max Scherzer and you're like, that dude's a god. And he is a god. I mean, he's an incredible pitcher. But if you were on the Nationals, over time, you'd realize that, like, Max Scherzer's a dude just like you. But he's better at stuff than you are, obviously. But he's still a dude just like you are. And when you start to figure that out, you're like, I could be like Max Scherzer, because Max Scherzer is not that much different than me as a human. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, he's obviously got next level stuff and competition in him that separates him from other players. But at the fundamental level, all those guys that sit in the Nationals bullpen or the Yankees bullpen, they're still 27 or 33-year-old men who like music, who like some foods and not others, who fart and make jokes and are immature sometimes, mature at other times. Like, they're all people just like us.
Yeah.
And when you hear that and when you realize that, you start to realize that the separator between them and you isn't as big as you thought it was.
Yeah.
You know, there's rookies on the Nationals who wonder if they could ever be as good as Max Scherzer. And the answer is that Max Scherzer was the same rookie that they were one day, you know, back in the day. He was wondering the same thing back in the day.
Yeah.
And then he decided and learned and watched and came into his own and figured out who he was and continued to get better and learn from competition. But the separator is just like what we talked about earlier. Like, when did Max Scherzer become Max Scherzer? He was always kind of Max Scherzer, but he wasn't Max Scherzer, right? Like, he was a reasonably successful pitcher early and got better and better and better until he became this revered Cy Young, like, incredible pitcher. But it didn't happen overnight.
Right.
And he was the same guy with like a 4 or 5 ERA, just like you can look down the bullpen and see 3 other guys better than him. And then one day he looked down and there was not one person better than him. So I think, especially as a young kid, when you hear one of your heroes or someone you look up to share a story that you can relate to, that tells you that they're a human in a similar way that you are, like, oh, Dan's had struggles in games with his mentality. Dan's been out there nervous and blown games because of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I could be like, and I do that too, but I could be like Dan if that happens to him too. Like it happens to Max Scherzer at times too. It's just like so subtle and so much smaller because he's better at minimizing it. You know, he definitely gets nervous once in a while and makes a bad pitch because of it. But most of us can't really tell when that is, like when he hung a curveball, because he just was like a little bit, I don't know, the pressure got to him, or he wasn't convicted enough in throwing that pitch, or he was still a little frustrated by something that happened. And so he lost his focus and hung a curveball. Like that stuff still happens to him. You just don't know it.
Right.
But it does happen. Right. It happens to everyone. And there's another really good book, if anyone's still listening to this episode, we're getting long, but I appreciate you having me. If anyone's still listening, I highly recommend David Cohn's book, Full Count: Education of a Pitcher. He's very honest about a lot of this stuff, and I thought it was great that he would share some of that stuff, because he talks about how many times in the World Series, when he was a rookie, like all these different times in his career, the spectrum, even at the very end, he still had lots of fears and doubts in himself and nervousness. But if you'd watched him on TV, you wouldn't have ever known that.
Yeah.
But he was still a real person. He was scared to death. He was going to blow his perfect game. All this stuff. He's still, David Cohn really showed you that he was a person, not just this robot pitcher. I thought that was really cool of him.
Yeah.
And all these guys are the same. Like David Cohn's potential Hall of Famer. I mean, he was incredible. So if he felt that stuff, certainly everyone else is too, you know? So yeah, I think there's a lot to learn. I think hopefully the game continues to trend in the right direction with players starting to open up a little more and people accepting that you're not weak because you share an experience with someone else. It's not always a self-fulfilling prophecy when you talk about your struggles at the plate, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I appreciate this conversation. You know, I got a couple more things I'd like to get to finish it off. You know, first, let's talk about comparing. You know, this has always been an issue, and it always will be, you know, and it may be kind of a bigger issue now because of social media. You know, we get a player that comes in working really, really hard, getting better, and then they get on social media and they're like looking at it, they're comparing themselves and their worth ethics to other guys and saying, maybe this guy's better, this guy's outworking me. You know, I mean, how should we have these conversations with kids that are constantly comparing themselves?
Yeah, let me go on record saying that I wasn't saying about the length of this conversation. I could talk baseball all day. I'd be happy to. One thing I'm fascinated by on the internet is people's attention spans.
Yeah,
I just always wonder, as I'm writing stuff, like especially with articles or my videos, I wonder, like, if I write another 500 words about this, will anyone read it? If I film another like 3 minutes on my YouTube, will anyone watch it?
Right.
But I appreciate those of you who still are. Anyway, so yeah, the most important thing that I learned personally is that you have to become the best version of yourself as a player, and that comparing yourself to others can be a very slippery, terrible slope. If you're saying, this guy has stuff that I wish I could do, I'm going to try to be more like him, or I need to do this stuff because it makes him successful. Because baseball especially is a very specialized sport, and you don't have to fit into a certain mold to be successful in it. If you're not super big, if you're, you know, I know Jose Altuve hit 30 home runs this year, so that made this conversation harder for me. But, you know, in the past, you could be David Eckstein and not hit more than a dozen home runs, and you were a very valid contributor to your team. And that's still the case now, and I had teammates at various points in my career who they didn't make it because they refused to be themselves, basically. I had a teammate who was kind of like Jose Altuve. He was small. He was an Arizona State grad. He was a pretty decent draft pick, and he just tried to hit dingers. It's like, dude, stop dropping your back shoulder and hitting fly balls that never leave the ballpark. Yeah. Like, you're trying to hit the ball out, but you can't. Now, if you absolutely kill it, like, he's a strong dude, don't get me wrong, like super fast and explosive and agile, and He's a super athlete, but he didn't have enough power to hit the ball out consistently. Like, he could hit one out once in a while if he crushed it. But most of the time, what happened was he tried to kind of hit it out, and he ended up flying out to like deep left center, and then he's out, rather than like hitting the ball on the ground or hitting line drives or trying to, hit a double and stretch into a triple. And I'm not saying that you have to hit ground balls if you're small. Like the game's changing. Like, right. I get it.
Right.
You can be Jose Altuve if you're capable, but most guys Jose Altuve's size are not Jose Altuve. Right. They'll hit 12 home runs. Jose hit 30. That's him. He's incredible.
Right.
Most guys his size need to hit line drives over the infield. They need to steal bases. They need to play great defense. They need to be a spark plug for their team. They need to have long at bats. They need to walk a lot. They need to be on base. That's what a small player can do. If you're a monster and you can be Aaron Judge, then sure, drop your back shoulder, stop hitting line drives, make your line drives become doubles and home runs. Totally get it. But the problem is when people don't understand which of that person they are or which person they are right now. And so they try to emulate someone else, or they try to be what they think they should be on social media. They see someone else who's completely different in their growth, in their development. They see a kid who's 16 on social media throwing 91 miles per hour. So they say, I need to throw harder like him because he's getting signed by a big D1 school. So I'm going to focus all my effort now on throwing harder. Whereas in reality, maybe that's not the best solution for them at that time. Like, they need to continue to pitch well. And we all have a sort of a limited bandwidth, in my view. So it's easy to say, oh, this kid's doing this. This is what this got this kid to get a scholarship at Miami or Louisville or USC or whatever. Therefore, I should do it that way. Or this kid throws 90. I only throw 84. Woe is me. That's really, really hard. But the biggest thing, and I'm sure you've seen this, is that I stopped viewing talent in baseball and ability as anything more than almost like your personal development. To say that a kid, so like on a team, say a 15U team, you can have a kid who's basically the size of a 17-year-old, right? You can have a kid who's 6'2", 190 pounds, and he throws 85, and he's a freshman, right? Right. It's almost not even true to say that he's better than another 15-year-old. It is true, but to say, like, say you have that kid, 6'2", 190, throws 85, freshman. Then you have another freshman, 5'9", 155, throws 77. Which kid's better at baseball? Now, today, the kid who throws harder gets more people out probably, but the kid who's smaller and throws still pretty darn hard for his size and probably has good mechanics because of it, or that's why he probably throws that hard. When that kid becomes 6'2" and 190, is he better than the kid who is already 6'2", 190? Maybe. So it's hard to say, like, you're better at baseball than another one. Really, that kid's development is just much more advanced than the other kid, right? You're 5'9", you're 155 as a freshman, you're a normal-sized freshman. Now, you're 6'2", 190 as a freshman, you're not a normal-sized freshman. You're like a 90th percentile freshman.
Right.
And so, sure, you can do physical stuff that 17-year-olds do. And 15-year-olds can only do stuff that 15-year-olds do. So to compare the two players is just going to lead you to sorrow if you're that smaller kid, because you're never going to be able to do that what that kid can do at his size. And so the thing you have to do is stick to your guns, control yourself, your mechanics, work hard, control what you can control today, throwing 77, knowing that when you're 17 and you hit that growth spurt and you're 6'2", 190, you might throw 92 because you had good mechanics, because you had a good arm, because you really focused on bettering yourself, not just being ahead of everyone else growth-wise. Because everyone else, the funnel, it's like traffic. Everyone hits the exit point at some time in their life. And usually that's in college. When you're like 21, you start to level off. So that kid who was 6'2", 190 as a freshman is 6'2", 210 as a junior in college. And so is the freshman who was 5'9", 155. They're both now 6'2", 210 as juniors in college. Now you really get to figure out who's better, right? Mm-hmm. Say the smaller kid throws 95 now, and the bigger kid still just throws 90 or now throws 90. You just never know. It's a constant jockeying, pulling ahead based on how fast you grow, obviously your genetics, all that stuff. But And this is what's really hard for kids to understand, because unfortunately, the kid who's 6'2", 190 as a freshman is going to be a D1 baseball player, because they can see that he's already got the skills. They can see that he's going to get better because he's already ahead of his peers. So conceivably, if you're ahead of your peers now, you'll continue to be ahead of your peers later, which is mostly true, but not completely true, because kids definitely catch up.
Sure.
So, and I was a late bloomer who caught up. I threw 80, then, and I threw into the mid 90s later. So, but even then, you wouldn't blame a college scout for taking the kid who's 6'2", 190, would you? No.
Right.
You take the bigger kid if he's available. So they get in despair because they see these kids go off the board. That kid who's 6'2", 190 is a freshman throwing 85. As a sophomore, he's 6'2", 195. He's throwing 88 now. He gets signed. He's a D1 baseball commit. Whereas everyone else is just waiting. And you see it on social media. It's in your face constantly. But all you can do is just continue to do you and work hard, try to better yourself, and wait for the time that you catch up. So that's not to say you just try to outwork them. I mean, you do just try to outwork them, and the growth spurts will come at some point. And one of the letters in my book is to a kid who was just like that. He was like 5'9", 150 pounds as a junior in high school. And now he's 6'2", I think he's 6'2", 200 or something, or 6'2", I don't know, 190. He had a massive growth spurt in his senior year. And it sucked because he was a super hard worker, very high baseball IQ, tons of practice in his off time. I mean, he was did everything in his power to be a college baseball player, but no one wanted him because he was little.
Yeah.
And he was way smaller than average as a junior. And then he was growth spurt, and now all those baseball skills just got applied to a much bigger, stronger, more athletic body. And now he's a heck of a catcher instead of being a heck of a small catcher.
Yeah.
So, and that was really hard on him, and you could see it in his face. And that was why his stories in my book, because my message to him in that chapter was that I've done a lot of hard work as a ball player in college. I never worked harder than when I was in college, like physically. Like I was killing it in the gym. I gave myself like no off days, doing all these crazy running workouts and pitching drills in my house at night. And I was like on baseball like 24/7. But that stuff was easy because I do this and I see how it benefits me. The really hard stuff is doing all that and then not having any idea if it's going to pay off because you're just waiting for Mother Nature to give you a growth spurt.
Nice.
That's what's really hard.
Mm-hmm.
Or for me, coming back from surgery, when I did all the work and I'm just wondering if someone's going to sign me because I can't control it anymore. I'm going to tryouts, they say no. I go to a tryout, they say no. I go to a team, I get released in spring training. And I'm just waiting in the real world. It's happened for a couple of weeks. I went to spring training after I was going to make my big comeback, my second elbow surgery. And I went to spring training, and I threw pretty darn well, and I got cut because they just didn't have a spot for me, basically. They chose other guys, and they weren't wrong doing so either. I was just the odd man out. And all the hard work, all those running workouts that make you want to puke, that stuff's easy compared to sitting at a table, chewing your lunch, wondering if that phone call is ever going to ring, and you have no control over it. And if it doesn't ring, your baseball career's over. That's the hard stuff.
Right.
And that's what wears on kids these days, because they see these other kids who are bigger, stronger, faster than them do stuff they can't do, that they will be able to do one day when their growth spurt hits, if they get a chance to keep playing, all those different things. And so it's really mentally challenging to stay the course and just to try to be the best version of yourself and not try to hit home runs when you're not capable and not overthrow and then just get killed because you're not pitching well because you're just trying to throw as hard as you can. That's where the evilness of baseball really comes into play.
Nice. So let's end up with one last question, if I could. You talked about hanging up the cleats, and I remember these times too, when you stop playing a game and going after a dream your whole life. It's tough and it's emotional, and unfortunately, for most of us, the game kind of became our identity. So can you kind of share your experience going from an athlete to just a regular Joe?
Yeah. and I've even realized like I'm still not through it. I'm still in the middle of it right now. I gave a talk about it just to a small Rotary club recently, and I shared a little bit about transitions and shared some of my story. But even leading up to that speech, like I realized I'm not through it by any means. I've been still finishing the audiobook version of my book, and that's been digging up, old memories as I go back through them. And I don't know. So basically what I've learned is that, besides no one talking about it, there's just a big continuum. Some players, and this goes to any sport, any athlete, some of them are just ready to walk away. Maybe it's because they mentally prepared themselves. They played a sport at a school, like say you're a college volleyball player and you go to a Division II school, you're not going to be on the Olympic team. You're not going to go play pro volleyball afterwards. There's just not going to be a way to keep playing at the highest competitive level after college. So you just know that after your 4 years of D2 volleyball, you're just going to move on to the real world. Like, that. And so they start mentally preparing for that a little bit easier over time. And so maybe those players are a little bit faster to hit the ground running and enter the real world and feel like they're okay. There's other players who they were sort of scratching and climbing up this mountain their whole life, and I was one of them. And then suddenly they just lose their pickaxe, just slips, and they're down at the bottom, and they don't know what to do, and they can't go back up, and the door's closed, and that's that. And they just got to go do something else. They got to turn in all their gear. Their locker is someone else's locker, and that's that. And so those are the kind of the two ends of the continuum. And it's not wrong either way. It doesn't mean you'd love your sport less if you play your final inning or your final game and you're okay and ready to go be an accountant or a nurse or a doctor or a lawyer or whatever. It doesn't mean you love your sport less.
Right.
And it doesn't mean you love your sport more and you're like better because you're really depressed about it and you're really upset and you don't really know who you are. It's just there's different circumstances for different people. And so comparing your situation to someone else is also not that useful because your feelings aren't wrong. However you feel about it, your feelings are valid.
Right.
And it's really just about opening up to other people and trying to but just trying to talk about the experience. And so for me, when I retired, the way it really hit me individually and personally was that I just bottled up a lot of really hard times, like my surgeries and the incredible disappointment of those, some really tough times in the clubhouse and getting chewed out by coaches and getting embarrassed by one coach specifically. All the times pitching through pain, the way my career ended was not on my terms. Just lots of strife and emotion went into that climb. And I worked so hard and I put in all that work for this bigger, greater goal. And like for me, again, I'm a very like stoic, direct kind of person, but like I'm a human being too. And like I'm emotional inside sometimes. And baseball, it was just a big grieving process. It felt like I lost a loved one. Like I was just kind of depressed and I was sobbing at random times. Really just because of a lot of these feelings that I bottled up and things I pushed aside to keep going, to keep charging, they had to get dealt with. Like there was a lot of sorrow that I felt in my surgeries and felt very alone going through those surgeries. And that those feelings didn't get vented to anyone. They just got pushed aside, and I kept charging, like I said. And then when you're done, all of those are in front of you like a big buffet that you have to then eat. Like it's just there. That was how it was for me. That's how it still is for me. I'm still not through it all. Because I'm finishing my audiobook. I'm going back through it. The book is helping me with closure. But just by reliving a lot of those stories, it puts me right back there. And it's helping me to deal with it. And it's just grief, like anything else. Like you lose a loved one, there's just a period of grief, and it's not logical. It's just there, and that's just kind of how it is. So, but the problem is that no one talks about it, like literally no one.
Right.
And because again, we don't want to feel weak.
Right.
And there's a big part of it is this: you don't want to feel like this whiny, privileged person.
Right.
And that was also a chapter at the very end of my book because, and it's weird how it worked out. A girl that I trained since she was an 8th grader, she got a full ride to play big D1 volleyball. And she started having injury problems towards the end of her high school career, and those never stopped. As soon as she hurt her knee, she tore ACL in a volleyball game, just landed on it weird, and it tore, and it, fell inward. From that ACL surgery, she was just like constantly dealing with another knee issue, another shoulder issue. She just never got healthy after that. So she finished one rehab and started another. And when I was like grieving my career, she just got the news that she needed like a 3rd surgery, and they basically said that she shouldn't do it, that she was going to have so little, she's had so much scar tissue in her knee and was going to have so little cartilage left or something like that, that she just wasn't going to be able to walk potentially if she kept playing volleyball and getting more surgeries. And so she had to walk away from the game. And so I was grieving at 31 years old, and here's this girl who worked as hard as I ever did at 20 being told she's done.
Yeah.
And it's like, it just gives you perspective. And so, but the problem is, that's not a reason to not feel bad about your own situation. Just because I got 10 more years than she did doesn't mean my feelings aren't valid, that I just still feel grief that my career is done, that I didn't make it where I wanted to make it, and that who I am as a ball player is just now different. Like, I'm just not a ball player anymore. And so even though you try to keep perspective, and that was a good grounding, I think, for me, that conversation with her, just understanding that I got a lot more than I should have, and I got a lot more than other people get, it still didn't make it feel any different, and that's the problem, is that you start to feel like, all right, I'm a successful white professional athlete who's smart and mostly healthy. What do I have to complain about, on planet Earth?
Yeah.
Right. And so that's valid, but at the same time, it doesn't change the way you feel.
Right.
And it doesn't make my feelings wrong. It doesn't mean I have to bottle it up and I can't feel hurt about it, just because I'm so much more privileged than millions of other people, which is 100% true. I'm very lucky for everything I've gotten. I haven't deserved any of it. I don't deserve to, I'm the product of my parents.
Yeah.
I'm a smart, white athletic guy born in America in the late 1900s into the 2000s, who lives in this crazy era where I'm safe. I have all this technology. I could play baseball. If I was born 100 years ago, I couldn't play baseball. Right. If I was born in 1885 instead of 1985, I'd be working in a field picking cotton.
Yeah.
Or I'd be working on a railroad. I'd be in a coal mine. Who knows what I'd be doing? Like, the circumstances behind me having the life that I had are miraculous.
Yeah.
But even then, it still doesn't change the fact that it was a legitimate part of who I was. It was a thing I loved since I was a kid, and I felt genuine grief letting it go.
Yeah.
So it's just a weird thing. It's a complicated thing, and we just need to, I think, as athletes, recognize that it exists, and that many of us really suffer trying to make that transition and just feel normal and figure out what our purpose is. Because I remember the first day getting out of bed, and I was just like, why? Not in the sense of like I was not depressed to the point of suicide or anything like that.
Right.
Not at all.
Right.
But it's just like every day for 20 plus years, I got out of bed and I had a workout to do. I had this to do. I had these dreams that were the same dreams I had yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to accomplish things today to be this major league ball player that I wanted to be. And then one day I woke up and none of that was on the table. It was like, what do I do today?
Yeah.
Do I go work out? If I go work out, what am I going to do and why?
Yeah.
What's the point of working out? What do I all my buddies are all playing. I wonder what they're doing. I don't get to go do it. I wonder if they're having fun. Do I get to compete anymore? I don't have anything to compete with anymore. There's just so many things in your life and your routine that are just completely upended. And even though I'm a bright guy and I had all these people that I still trained, I had a successful business, and I like to write, I've learned other things about me slowly during my career that I find I'm passionate about. I still felt lost. It doesn't matter how much other stuff you like. it's still just like losing a loved one.
Right.
And at least that's how it was for me. That's not that same way for everyone, but it's like that way for many athletes, whether you leave after, pro ball, whether you were a Hall of Fame major leaguer, or whether you were a high school kid who just loved the game so much.
Yeah.
It could strike you the same way. I'm sure there are high school kids who feel the same way I felt, even though they got 15 years less baseball than I did, because they just loved it so much.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't matter. And it's not baseball, it's softball, it's volleyball, it's gymnastics, it's track and field, it's all of those sports, because you just, for the longest time, you are a runner, you're a pole vaulter, you're a football player, you're a basketball player, you're a tennis star, and then suddenly you're just an accountant.
Yeah.
And it's like, what do I do now?
Mm-hmm.
And even now, it's fascinating. I'm talking to you here from a WeWork location in Washington, D.C., and I've never made a friend in the real world.
Yeah.
I mean, as weird as that sounds, I had my baseball buddies in the dugout. When you show up in college, you're immediately ushered into a room and you meet all your teammates. And so you have like your cadre of teammates and the other athletes. They're like your built-in friends.
Yeah.
You rarely meet other regular students in college, because it's just, you're so socially stuck in that circle. You hang out with them off the field. You're around them all the time. You become very close. Like, it's almost like others are just outsiders, and they don't have enough time to get to know you very well, and you don't have enough time or the energy to invest in other people a lot of times. Right. Especially if you have a major that's not very collaborative. Like I majored in philosophy, and there were never like group papers, so it's not like I was working with someone. When you have a collaborative major in college, it's a little bit better because you do group stuff and experiments with each other and more group work, but that's person to person. And then you go off and play pro ball. You're in the dugout with these guys every day, like literally all the time. Yeah. And you just have this mindset, and it's not the way athletes talk to each other and the way they think, and it's a little different than everyone else. Mm-hmm. And then in the off season, you're still working out, you're doing all these other things, you're still prepping for next season, and you start to encounter other people who are people in the real world. But for me, I had my academy, so all the people that I met there were kind of just like athletes just like me, and parents of athletes just like me. And it was never like, and so here I am, and I'm in like this office building, and I do my writing and my video stuff and a lot of other business things that I'm working on. And I'm walking around here, and there's all these people I'm a marketing consultant, I'm a media strategist, I'm an accountant, I'm like, they have all these job titles, and if I were to ask them, I'm like, oh, so what do you do? Oh, I'm a media strategist. I think it's a job title. I don't know what that is.
Right.
Like, what do I follow? Oh, do you like it? Like, do you, right. do you like the internet? And it's not, I'm very socially adept now. I'm still a little bit awkward, but right. This isn't like me being this little kid who's scared, but I still don't know what the real world is like.
Yeah.
Everyone has to get broken into it slowly, and I'm just now getting broken into it, is my point, where there's never been a point where I've like sat down and like, oh, what do you do? Oh, I work in this. Well, and like, I just made a friend in the real world who has no ties to sports, no ties to what I did. And it's a new thing. And everyone finds that challenging. I talked to a buddy who he's a medical sales rep now. Yeah. And I'm like, how's it been for you? And he's like, well, it's been all right. He's like, it definitely took some time for me to understand like what you can and can't do, because it's very different than a clubhouse culture. Right. And he's like, a lot of people aren't competitive like I am. He's like, a lot of them don't have the same drive to like be the best, or they don't have, the way they are is just fundamentally different. He couldn't even explain it super well, but I get what he meant. Yeah. So he's like, I feel like I'm just going to be promoted and be better than some of these people because they just don't have a mindset to like make it like I did. He's like, the way I was in baseball, it still applies here in the medical sales field. And he's like, I don't understand how some of these people don't have that drive or that. Right. And I kind of understood, but even then he's like, so some people I feel like I can relate to, and other people I can't. Whereas in the clubhouse, in the dugout, you can pretty much relate to a lot of aspects of a lot of players, and you have a lot of shared experiences. Like you all grew up the same way. Yeah. You all played the sport the same way. You're all very competitive. You're all very kind of alpha. you have very similar off-season tastes, and you're all interested in like competitive things and sporty fitness things, and there's just like, it's so much easier to meet friends in that situation. Here it's like, what do people do? What do you, what's like a normal person's routine like? Right. You know, like, again, that's a little of an exaggeration, but it's still one of those things that is part of leaving the game, that you're introduced to this new environment and it's just foreign to you for a little while. Mm-hmm. So, and that's, I think, by far the least big a deal is like adjusting to office life, but just adjusting to the fact that the sole reason you got out of bed for a long time and a big part of your identity, it's just gone. And it's just a long period of finding out what your next passion about, and how you sort of move forward to find a new career and new passions for what's going to carry you on to retirement, I guess.
Yeah. Yep. Dan, I appreciate you coming on and talking. I appreciate what you're doing. I think I learned today that I may not fully be over with how my career ended, and that I need to deal with some of these emotions, and as well as, you know, starting to be a little more relatable to my players. So anyway, man, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Jeff. Really appreciate what you're doing as well.